when it appeared obvious to you that you were headed for a career in music?
Oh, Lord. Yes. I think when I was 9 years old, I was telling people what label I'd record for. I got the label wrong. I said Pine Nixler, which was the label that my then hero Lonnie Donegan used to record for. But I was convinced I would make records when I was 9.
There's no doubt about that. You began as a lead guitarist in a band. Was there any main contributing factor towards you shifting your attention towards songwriting and performing?
Yeah, Bob Dylan, really. When I left school, I joined a Beatle band along with everyone else. Well, Shadows first, and then the Beatles. And then Dylan came along, and I wasn't a terribly good guitar player, but I could rhyme things, and in that particular atmosphere, the ability to string lots of words together was a much rarer talent than being able to make lots of noise on a guitar. And I figured that the competition would be a lot less if I was a rhymer than if I tried to be a lead guitar player.
Dylan was your earliest introduction to folk music?
Well, to essentially just stringing lots of words together, yeah. Who else? But, thinking back, I've been listening to a lot of Lonnie Donegan, and it's pretty much the same thing. It's a sort of lyric songs, were always very big with me.
Yeah. You're very early...
As opposed to, just like doing rock and roll things that, just basically had 5 words in them.
Your very early days were spent frequenting and playing at folk clubs. Do you have any specific memories of that scene at the time?
Well, I don't know. I played in some, just like little coffee bars and things. I played at Bunch's Coffee Bar for 2.5 years before I made a record. I don't know. I have lots of memories, none of them particularly specific. Just basically turning up and strumming a guitar while people, sort of packed into the place. It was like the Black Hole of Calcutta. It was supposed to hold about 15 people, and it got about 70 or 80 in there.
Who were some of your contemporaries there around that time?
Oh, all the people who went on to become well-known on the English folk scene, Ralph McTell, I knew right from the start, Roy Harper, John Martin, Bridget St. John, and Bert Jansen and John Renbourn were a little older than me. Davy Graham, and then all the people that from Fairport and Still I Stand, and the Incredible String Band, Mike Harrell and Robin Williamson. Basically, those were my contemporaries.
Right. Is that a true story? I read somewhere that Paul Simon tried to sell you his song catalogue?
Well, yes, actually. He wasn't specifically trying to sell it to me. He was trying to sell it. I remember we got up one day. I was staying in the same apartment where he lived for about 3 months, and Paul was always, I don't know, ambivalent about whether or not he would make it really big, and he was he was making about £10 a night in folk clubs, and he had his eye on the on the main goal, but he didn't know whether it would be commercial. And periodically he would go out and do things to raise money. And I remember we went round to some music publishers, and he was trying to sell his then catalog, which was I Am a Rock, Sounds of Silence, Homeward Bound, and everything else basically from the first couple of albums. And he was asking £5,000. Sounded like a fortune, but I guess I realized later that if I'd had £5,000, that might have been the best investment I've ever made. But sure. no one bought them, so to this day he owns all those songs.
Lucky for him too, I guess.
I think so.
Yeah. I guess you've been asked this a lot over the years, the recurring theme of history in your songwriting. Is that something you consciously set out to do at some point in your career? What just happened?
Well, I'd written a lot of love songs. I think everybody starts by writing love songs, and probably 99.9% of the people who write songs never write anything else. It's just basically what they do. They don't think beyond that. And I did 4 albums of them, and I'd more or less exhausted that particular line of endeavor. And I thought, what in the world else, do I know anything about? And I'd always read lots of history, and I thought, what if I put it all together into a historical album? It turned out to be my 5th album, Past, Present, and Future, and that was like all historical songs. And I thought, well, this is interesting. Maybe this is something that I could pursue. I looked around, and Antonia Fraser was doing pretty well, doing the same thing in novel form. And I thought, well, maybe it can be done with music. And I was sort of half convinced that, historical folk rock would be the next big thing. It never was. Obviously, over the last quarter of a century, I've realized that it didn't quite have the commercial impact that I thought it would have, but it, along with many other things, seemed like a good idea at the time.
Would you look at that now as maybe a turning point in your songwriting?
Well, yes, it was a turning point. It unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't really know which way around it is. The general public, at least in America, only know me for one song, and it's not at all historical. So, I don't know. I personally like all those historical songs better than anything else I've done because they just, I don't know, they seem more in the songwriting tradition. If you assume that the narrative ballad is the earliest known form of song, it goes back to Thrace 14,000 years ago. And certainly, it filters through people like Homer and Euripides and Aeschylus and people like this. And if you say, okay, there's a continuity through all these people to, say, Roads to Moscow, then I feel that I'm writing in some sort of a tradition as opposed to, just sort of writing to a boombox or something. Yeah. But this is not the way the majority of the world, and certainly not the way the majority of the pop world thinks. So, it's very, very hard to get narrative historical ballads on the radio. At least it is in America. I have absolutely no idea what's played in Australia.
Oh, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah. So you didn't study history formally at any particular stage, did you? No,
I just began reading it. I was doing a French course and in school, and they made us read L'étranger by Camus. And from Camus, I got off onto Jean-Paul Sartre and read the trilogy of The Roads to Freedom. And that got me into the period immediately prior to World War II and the beginning of World War II. And from there, I picked up Schirer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and Alexander Worth's History of Russia at War. And that got me into Solzhenitsyn and all sorts of other people as well, a lot of Russian writers. And that eventually, turned into Roads to Moscow, which appeared on Past, Present, and Future. And by that time, I was beginning to just sort of work backwards. And over the next 20 years or so, I just kind of read backwards until I hit Troy. And, like various songs, came out of that, all of which I'm very fond of.
Absolutely. Has it become, in a way, a source of annoyance to you over the years, people always wanting you to explain the meaning and stories behind songs?
I love to do it. When I perform live, sometimes the introductions to the songs are much longer than the songs themselves. In the instance of where I wrote a song about the Trojan War called Helen and Cassandra, which was, comparing the character of Helen and the character of Cassandra, because I see parallels in people that I see now. Every day there are lots of Helens and lots of Cassandras out there. And in going into the entire story about the Golden Apple and the judgment of Paris and the fall of Troy, I began telling the story, and after about 20 minutes, this was in a rock club in Florida, after about 20 minutes, I'd been happily, totally absorbed in telling the story. And I looked up and the audience was sitting there looking at me with their mouths open. You could have heard a pin drop. It was the most extraordinary thing. They'd gone to hear music and they were like drinking, and this person has just given them 20 minutes of Greek mythology, and it's, I'm prone to do this. If I can get away with it, because what I like is, if I go to see a concert and the artist, actually makes some endeavor to talk to the audience and, tell them what the songs are about. I know that I like that, so I figured that, if I did it, other people would like it. It depends really how long the attention span of the audience is, and you can always gauge that, usually by the first song or two.
Yeah, I guess the type of venue you're playing in too would have a little bit to do with it.
Oh, it has a lot, yeah. If I were opening for the Rolling Stones or something, I couldn't really get away with a 20-minute introduction.
I don't think so.
But if you're playing to your own audience in a little club somewhere, it's kind of charming to do that.
Yeah.
Mark, I'm not even the worst offender. Robin Williamson of the Incredible String Band once told a 40-minute story before he played a harp piece, and it was most of the first set. So, I think the folk singers in general tend to be storytellers.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask you about the songwriting process. Do you carry songs around with you for a while before you get them down?
Yeah, ideas. I mean, there's always an idea in the back of your head. You think, oh, I must write a song about, at the moment, I've been, for the last couple of years, I've been thinking I really ought to write a song about Rupert Brooke. And I've sort of, that's about as far as I've got. I wrote a tune that sounded like it might fit. But I haven't really come up with the line. I mean, what normally happens is you get an idea, then you get a tune, and then you might get, like a phrase, just a phrase, whatever it might be. For example, On the Border, I had that phrase, I didn't know what it meant. I was listening to a speech by Edward Heath, who was a British Prime Minister, who said that in the future, civilians would be in the front line of battle. And it seemed as if, borders would then become sort of very mobile things because they would exist more in the mind than anywhere else. And it was with that in mind that I eventually wrote that song. So what I have normally is an idea, then a tune, and then like a phrase, just one phrase, and I take it from there.
And once you've got something down, do you tend to tinker around with them a bit, or you usually find you've gone with your first draft?
No, I tinker around with them a lot. I've written as many as 7 drafts of lyrics, radically different lyrics for songs in the past. And it's not unusual for me to do 2 or 3. What a lot of musicians do, if they're, say, rock guitar players, they would get a backing track and go in and do, 5 or 10 or 15 different solos and pick the best one. And what I do is I get a backing track and I write, a bunch of different lyrics and, and try them in exactly the same way. It's just a different way of working.
Has that method of songwriting for you changed much over the years? And today, in comparison?
As you get older, you get lazier, and hopefully you get a little cleverer about it, so you don't write quite as many words. I find that I'm more likely to take a first draft now than I would have been 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I would have been terribly fussy. I mean, I was sitting writing Flying Saucery, which is a metaphor about airplanes as lovers. And I was trying to get the word aileron into the song, and I spent 2 days trying to get this stupid word into into this song, and I never did get it. And I certainly wouldn't do that these days,
You just find another word.
Yeah. And I had another line, movie cues fade into a Cinerama haze. And I remember just basically sitting staring into space for days on end because I knew the word fade was too obvious and too... I just didn't really care for it particularly. It's been used a lot. Paul Simon uses that word a lot. And I knew there was another word. And eventually I did get this one, and the word was diffuse. If you listen to the feel of it, movie cues diffuse into a Cinerama haze. And of course that was the word I was looking for. So, the week or so I spent looking for that one word was probably worth it, But you can become very obsessive, and the bottom line is that the normal person in the street doesn't really hear song lyrics anyway. So if you agonize for a week over a word, you end up hurting your brain, and very few people really care as much as songwriters. I've heard it said that songwriters are the only people in the world who do care about song lyrics, so that may be true.
Wrong, yeah. You had a long association with guitarist Peter White. How did that come about?
Well, when he was 20, he joined the band as a keyboard player. I was off to do a tour of America in '75, and I was doing 19 dates opening for Linda Ronstadt, actually. And I needed a piano player. Peter joined as a piano player, and then we went into the studio immediately after that tour to record what became the Year of the Cat album. And I was actually recording On the Border, and he said he could play Spanish guitar, and I had no real idea that he could do this until that moment. And so he produced the Spanish guitar and played the solo that is on the record. And that was the first thing he ever played on a record, I think. So what happened was that he went from being the keyboard player to being the guitar player.
And what's he doing these days?
Oh my! I mean, he's quite famous over here. He's released 6 solo albums. The last one of which I think was on the jazz charts for a year in Billboard. So if you haven't heard of him in Australia, well, there's this form of music which is very, very big in the States, kind of new age music, I guess you'd call it. And Peter has become one of the stars of it.
Oh, tremendous. How's your relationship with record companies been over the years?
Oh, mixed. I could probably say I've been thrown off more labels than you've had hot dinners. I mean, I think it's largely true. I mean, it's astounding how many record labels I've been on and off. It's a very difficult thing because a record label. I learned this really early on. I signed to CBS in England. They didn't want me. They wanted a band called the Piccadilly Line. This was '67, and my manager says, "Well, you can have the Piccadilly Line if you'll take our Stewart." So I kind of got in the back door, and then the Piccadilly Line record didn't sell at all. And I think CBS just were asleep at the switch because I managed to sneak in another couple of records while they weren't looking. But they weren't enthusiastic. They renewed the contract because the records had kind of made a tiny profit. I made 3 more of them that made a slightly bigger profit. But after 6 albums, they looked at the whole thing and they said, this is really, it's not, we don't see any hits. Where are the hits, And they had a band called the Wombles at the time that were huge. And they said, listen, we just want to concentrate on the Wombles. You've got to find some other home. Now, at the time, I had all the sales figures, and I said, well, yeah, but you're making money. And they said, yeah, but we're not making enough money. So I went elsewhere, and the very next record I made was Year of the Cat, which sold a couple of million copies. So CBS lost that one, and that was made for a tiny label in the States that only employed 10 people. They went bankrupt. Then I signed to RCA, and they got bored with me and got rid of me. I signed with Arista in the States, and they threw me off the label. Then I signed with a tiny record label called Passport that went out of business, and then I signed with a slightly bigger label in the States called Enigma, and they went out of business. And then I made 3 albums for a label called Mesa Blue Moon, and they got bought by somebody else. Then I had some distributed by Rhino, and they lost interest, and now I'm with EMI in England. And I don't think I have a label in the States at the moment. It's a very strange business. The business side of it is kind of nuts if you do what I do, which is essentially not a very commercial form of music.
Yeah.
It means that you're forever, sort of bobbing around out there, and every now and then someone will pick up a record. I think I said about 15 years ago, when I got bunged off Arista, that basically I probably wouldn't make any more records, and I've made 5 since then. So, as the old James Bond film said, never say never. That's about all I can tell you about records.
It's a little merry-go-round ride there.
It is. It's nice because I have a fine collection of my records, all on different labels.
You tackle the
some of them have been on 3 labels. Now I think about it, Year of the Cat has been so far on Arista, Janus, EMI, and RCA. That's one record. It's already been on 4 labels, and that's just in the States and England.
You tackle the recording process any different now to say 20 years ago?
Yes, it's completely different because obviously I began making records on a fairly small budget. Then when we had a hit, all of a sudden we did what everybody does, which is enlist the aid of orchestras and things, and it became quite expensive. And then, then we didn't sell so many records, and we were back to making essentially folk acoustic records. I think that the amount of trouble you get into in a studio is directly linked to the size of the budget.
You enjoy the studio?
Oh no! It's like pulling teeth. If I had my way, I would not go near a studio. I don't enjoy that side of it at all. I'm not very good at it, and I have no patience.
Yeah.
Basically, if I do, sort of a couple of takes on a song, I never want to hear it again. And by the time I'm up to take 57, it's sort of, and I've lost all interest. Some people are very, very good in studios. They live for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely not one of them.
What about advancements in recording technology? Do you think it's taken some of the heart and soul out of the recorded product?
Well, it's certainly a different world. There are a lot of machines out there now that make people's lives incredibly much simpler. I just even 20 years ago working with different producers. It would be perfectly normal to spend most of the first week just listening to drum sounds. Nothing else. Just basically bass drum beats over and over and over again, and just to get it absolutely perfect, or as near to it as you could. And these days, you go in and a machine does it. You push the button and it's there. Or you sample somebody else's drum sound that's just there. So records can be made a lot faster. Whether they have more or less soul is not really for me to say. It's just a different world.
How are you?
And also all the stuff that you have to take on tour has got a lot smaller. I've got to tell you that if you're trying to lug a Hammond organ around a club circuit in North America, it is a pain. I mean, you get 4 people lugging and tugging this thing up flights of stairs into sort of like little rock clubs, and just trying to put the thing in and out of vans, and it drives you crazy. I mean, now you can buy the same thing in a little box the size of a portable radio, and makes all the same noise.
A lot easier.
And it's just extraordinary. I mean, I think in some ways bands are a lot luckier now because the technology has changed, but in other ways the business has become a lot more fierce, and they have to give up all their writing royalties and blah 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 and whatever to get record contracts. So in some ways it's better, and in some ways worse, I think.
How are you as a judge of your own work? Are you hard on yourself at times, do you think?
Well, all the ones I like the best tend to be the ones that no one else likes, and I think that's just because I don't hear them very often. So the ones I don't have to sing every night tend to be my favorites, you know.
How do you go about constructing a live set with such huge catalogue of material to choose from?
Well, it depends where I'm playing. I mean, if I'm opening a show for another band and the audience really have no idea who I am or what I do, it falls into, I fall into 2 different moods about the thing. I mean, I can either say, okay, I'm going to try and please them because there are various songs that are fairly easily assimilated, and I can play them and they're like party tricks and people will smile and clap. Or I can say I'm going to try and educate them, and I can go out and do 30 minutes of complicated historical melodrama, and they look at me as if I've come from Mars. So it depends whether I'm sort of being kind of aggressive or pleasant, and I fall into those 2 different moods. If it's an audience that knows what I do, then I tend to pick songs from every different period of what you might loosely be called a career. I would do everything from, I've made 15 albums, so I would just on some dates I've just played 1 song from each album.
What is the extent of your live work these days? You on the road much?
Well, I just got back from doing some gigs in Spain and some gigs in England, and I think the next thing up is that there might be a tour here in February and March with Dave Mason and Jim Capaldi from Traffic. I'm just actually waiting to hear if that one comes in. And I was supposed to go off on a tour of England with Steel Ice Band in March and April, but I just heard yesterday that I'm not doing it. But things things come in and go out all the time. I mean, it's the nature of the business. I would say I probably play 50 or 60 shows a year. I wouldn't want to do more. Because you get basically when you pass the age of 50, the joys of pushing 6 suitcases and a couple of guitars around an airport, are and loading them in and out of Holiday Inns on your own, which is what I do most of the time. The joys wear off,
It loses the feel.
It loses the feel. I mean, I must have sat in at least 2,000 different Holiday Inn coffee shops and tried to get breakfast, mostly in vain. No, sorry, it's after 11 o'clock. We couldn't do that. And, after a while, it's like seeing the same movie over and over again. I don't get paid for playing on stage. I mean, that's only, like an hour and a half of each day. I mean, I think I basically get paid to be a porter and carry luggage around airports.
That's the real work.
That's the work. And I get paid to do laundry at strange hours of the night and that kind of stuff.
And when you are touring, the makeup of musicians behind you, is it... How many in your band? The backup behind you when you are touring live? Well,
I do different formats for different occasions. I mean, mostly I work solo, as I did when I started out, which is just me and a guitar. About half the time I work with another guitar player, which is like 2 acoustic guitars, and just occasionally, I roll out the band and we do the whole band thing. But it depends basically on how much money they want to pay me.
Yeah.
It's unusual these days that they would want to pay for 5 people. So, if it's a low budget tour, which it tends to be, then it's just me and a guitar.
Yeah. Is it as big a mystery to you as it is to your fans out here that no Australian promoters ever approached you to do here?
Yeah, that's a total mystery.
Yeah.
I don't know why, because I have said probably about every 3 years for the last 25 years, why don't we ever play in Australia? And I always get the same answer, which is no one has ever asked us. And it's true. I mean, this despite the fact that I think a couple of my records did reasonably well in Australia.
Extremely well, yeah.
Albeit a long time ago. But even then, we never got an offer. We have never had an offer from an Australian promoter, ever. I mean, ever in my life. I've never had one. I mean, if I had, I would have, sort of considered going out and touring. It just hasn't happened. So I have to assume that either they don't have concerts in Australia, or they don't have folk concerts in Australia, or they don't want us to have concerts in Australia. But either way, I just don't know. I couldn't place it,
Yeah, that's a real mystery. What kind of music interests you as a listener these days?
As a listener?
Yeah.
I still listen to what I consider interesting lyricists. People who, I mean, if I switch on the radio and I hear, "Ooh, baby, I love you, baby, you make me feel so fine, you take me high, baby, and ooh, do it one more time." I mean, I basically change the channel, no matter what the music is behind it. There are some amazingly good lyricists. There's a band called They Might Be Giants, for example. Do you know them in Australia?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Now, they are quite extraordinary. I mean, after 35 years of listening to rock lyrics, I basically, half the time, I can tell you the next line before the person has sung it. It's not, it isn't brain surgery. You hear the same cliches rolling on and on and on. And I love to listen to They Might Be Giants records because I cannot tell you what's going to happen next, Oh, God. Blue Canary in the Outlet by the Light Switch. I mean, it's wonderful stuff, And they have turns of phrase that I think are just spectacular. They remind me in some ways of a sort of updated Incredible String Band, in the way that you just don't know what the next word is going to be. And I find that very, very exciting and very wonderful. And there are, a bunch of other people who are doing interesting stuff. I like Amy Mann, for example. I thought the Whatever album was absolutely brilliant. And of course, I listen to all the old war horses like Joni Mitchell and Elvis Costello and Leonard Cohen. Anybody who can string interesting and unusual words together, no matter what the format, I like to listen to.
Sure. Away from music, I believe you're an avid wine collector.
Oh yeah, that's true. In fact, you know what? This is so weird because the night before last, I just drank a bottle of Australian wine.
Oh, there you go.
Clarendon Hills Shiraz, 1995, and it was very, very good.
Nice drop, yeah.
I've been hearing about Clarendon Hills for a while because they produced this wine called Australis, I believe, that was it was said to have blown away Grange Hermitage in a blind tasting, and that would Penfolds that would be quite amazing if they did, because I always thought that Grange was Australia's top wine, and I couldn't find the Australis, but I did find the Clarendon Hills Basic 95 Shiraz, and I had it. It reminded me of a 53 Obrion because it had that kind of tobacco quality to it. I know it's made out of a completely different grape varietal, but it had kind of shades of tobacco in it, which I thought was very interesting.
How extensive is your collection now?
Oh, Lord. It's a lot less than it was. I've been deliberately running it down. I had about 3,000 bottles. I think probably I would have about 1,500 now. What I tend to do is, sort of drink I drink and replace domestic, cheaper stuff that we have as everyday wine on a regular basis, and the core of the collection, the Great Red Bordeaux and Burgundy, I tend to drink very infrequently because I'm trying to make them last. Given the prices, I don't want to ever have to go out and buy any more Bordeaux. So, I drink it infrequently because it has to last over the next 20 years. But, probably at any given time, I've got about 1,500 bottles now.
Wow. Okay, just to sum up, what for you would be, if you had to put it down to one thing, the key to survival for you for so long in the music business?
I don't know. I'm the wrong person to ask because basically I've done it. I did it all the wrong way. I think if you can provide a service in any in any form of endeavor, music business or anything else for that matter that no one else does, then you will have, albeit in a rather small way, a good chance of survival, and for better or for worse. As far as I know, I'm the only historical rock folk singer in the world. I mean, there may be others, but I haven't come across them. So possibly it's as simple as that. But I think in general terms, it seems to me that perseverance and luck seem to be the two most important things.
Yeah.
If you keep going, eventually something good will probably happen if you're lucky. And I can give you endless examples of that. When I was growing up in Bournemouth, I guess as a teenager, one of the local guitar players that everyone thought was really good was a guy called Andy Summers. And I actually bought a guitar off Andy when I was 19. And he was in and out of jazz bands, and then he joined up with, I think, the New Animals, and he formed a band with Zoot Money called Dantalion's Chariot. And, he did this and he did that, and then he got to be 35, and he, I basically never had any hits, and he'd been doing this for 20 years. Now, you and I, and well, not me, but a lot of people in this world, would have said, oh, the hell with it, and gone off and sold used cars. And I think Andy was 37 when he joined a band called The Police. And the rest, of course, is history. But yeah. I love these stories. It's just 20 years of bashing your head against the wall, and then after all of that time, you get your first hit band, and it becomes one of the biggest bands on the planet. And it's, so basically perseverance will do that for you.
Yeah, never give in. Okay, any plans for a new album in '98?
I don't know. It's back to that. We already covered that with the Never Say Never.
Yeah.
I always have tunes. I always have ideas. I don't have a record label, but that hasn't stopped me in the past. I mean, if someone emerges with a budget and a timetable, I would be happy to make them a record.
Material's there anyway.
Sorry?
The material's there waiting anyway. So.
Well, I don't. It's unfinished. I don't finish songs unless there's some reason for it. I don't go out and write a bunch. Basically what I do is I always have ideas, but I leave them unfinished because that way, I can change them according to how I feel at the time. But basically, someone has to wave a contract under my nose to get me to make a record.
Okay. All right, Al, I won't hold you up any longer. Thanks very much for your time this morning. Thanks for many years of musical enjoyment, and rest assured there are many people here waiting for an Australian promoter to get their act together, and so we can see you down here.
Well, never say never to that too. I'll probably be 75 by the time I get down to do my first gig, but the spirit is willing. We're just awaiting an offer.
Terrific. Okay, all the best. Thanks again for your time, and take care.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.